Okay. We're just waiting for folks to top up their coffees. While everyone in the room here in New York City at the Wyndham Dream Hotel is just finding their last-minute seats, we want to say a good morning from New York, USA, to all of our viewers around the world. We just received a count that we're over 50 folks streaming in from Middle East, Africa, Asia, as well as South America. So good morning to you, or good evening. Just a quick thank you before we get started this morning. First to SubTel Forum, who's providing the live streaming of the event. Special thanks to Stephen and Christian, doing an excellent job. I had a chance to catch up with them last night over dinner, and we're very grateful for your support. And we believe that this is the first of its kind of a live streaming event for the submarine cable space on a global basis. So there are obviously the folks in the room here, and we'll have more folks coming in as they're probably fighting traffic in New York City through the Lincoln Tunnel and what have you. Also like to thank Jeff Seal from Telecom Review. I've known Jeff for almost 24 years. We spent time in Hong Kong together, and he's back in Texas now, doing a great job with Telecom Review North America. And Jeff, appreciate all your help and support and friendship. I know that you had a chance yesterday to send out the notice for this event, the State of Subsea, to over 69,000 folks in your database. And many of them will be joining online, the streaming very shortly. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you. The last thank you goes to our public relations firm, North 6 Agency. APTelecom started working with the North 6 Agency about 4 years ago in 2010 when we founded the business. And founder and president Matt Rosetta is my consigliere in terms of my confidant. Matt was the brainchild behind this concept and this idea. So to Matt and his team, you've done a great job. So thank you. Okay, just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We understand and appreciate that folks have a busy schedule. So if you have to go, feel free to excuse yourself at any time. The content of today's discussion and the PowerPoints and everything will be available on the stateofsubsea.com website. So at any point, if you need any information, that's available online. That's also in the packet in front of you, okay? So we do understand everyone has a tight schedule, and for the folks that joined us in person today here in New York, again, thank you. And for the folks dialing in around the world, that's also available online. Just two last housekeeping items before I introduce our keynote this morning. The first is we are at APTelecom a big believer in social media. We believe that it enables us to punch above our weight, so to speak. We have a live Twitter as well as Facebook handle for this event. So if you're in Angola, in Luanda, our client there, Angola Cables, good afternoon. I believe it's just past 2 p.m. there, and I hope you had a nice lunch. And I know that you guys have some questions and comments that you're going to be sending in via the live Twitter feed. So, and thank you. Okay, last comment on the housekeeping. If you do have a mobile phone or cell device, if you could just put it on silent or turn it off, okay? The agenda for this morning is really specifically covering systems that are currently being built and why. Our first system is going to be focusing on ASC, which Peter McGrath, the CEO of NextGen, based in Melbourne, has made the journey here to the United States, and we're very honored and very welcome to have Peter. And after Peter's discussion, we're going to be hearing a presentation on the SAX cable that Tom Soja will be delivering on behalf of Angola Cables as proxy, because they're dialing in on the live streaming. Then we will have a roundtable discussion that will be interactive, moderated by Sean Bergen, co-founder of APTelecom. And on that panel will also be Tom and Peter, who will be presenting prior, and Dave Robles and CJ from Top Patch, a security company. Dave is with TE Subcom. They're a manufacturer of submarine cable and kit globally. At 11:10, we'll focus in on some of the key emerging markets that we see. We have a short video on Angola, some of the highlights that are happening in this emerging market and some of the opportunities. And then we do a little bit of a micro dip down into Indonesia, all the good stuff that's going on. The ASC cable is landing in Indonesia, and Indonesia is a blossoming market with a lot of good things happening there. That'll be followed after this video presentation by a Q&A, brief Q&A, and then keeping with Jeff Seal's tradition when I first met him in Hong Kong, the lucky draw. We have 2 lucky draw prizes for this morning, and Jeff is the master lucky draw guru. Those of you that have not put your card into the bucket that's outside, you still have a chance to do so to qualify for the lucky draw. And then the event will conclude, and again, everything will be available online. Okay. Just a very brief 2-minute overview on APTelecom. I mentioned we were founded in 2010. We help new submarine cable builds become a reality. Our approach is very much of a roll up your sleeves, get it done from a pre-sale perspective. We're consultants in the respect that we align ourselves with the success of the project. So if you're looking for a system to be built, and you require pre-sales to support your debt financing, that's our main forte, and that's our core competency, what we do. A lot of folks look at us, if you're a consulting firm or if you're an established operator, to validate pricing, to look at certain routes. We do some post-sale work, but our main driver in terms of what we do is really for pre-sale works. And last slide on APTelecom, from a global sales channel, our footprint is spread throughout the world. So we obviously have coverage on the east and west coast of the United States to service the carrier community and the content community on the western seaboard of the U.S. We have a presence in Southeast Asia, where Sean Bergen is based, and we have a very strong advisory board around the world that helps us to support our rollout of new submarine cable systems. So, without further ado, I'd like to call to the podium Peter McGrath, the CEO of NextGen, to present the ASC story this morning. Please join me in welcoming Peter to the podium.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, APTelecom, for this opportunity. And it's a real pleasure to be here and to meet so many people, and of course those who are on the online streaming, which is an exciting initiative. Today I'm going to talk a bit about our business, very briefly, the NextGen Group in Australia, and then I'll move into ASC and touch on that. We have a business that's a specialised business. This is in Australia, that focuses on data, high-speed data, data centres. We've had a position in data centres for some 10 years. We're now one of the largest providers in the market with co-location. We also have a fledgling cloud services business, and we've been working on expanding our network into a core part of Asia, which is Singapore. And Singapore is a critical destination in Asia, if you like, because many of the global submarine cables come into Singapore. It's got a very open access regulatory regime, very similar to Australia, in fact, and not dissimilar from the US. Many carriers in Singapore, you know, a large data center environment as well, so it's a great place to do business. And similarly, it has a lot of financial services and multinational corporations that have offices there in Singapore. So for us, it was a logical extension to look to move into Singapore. Just recently, we concluded a transaction whereby Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, which is based in Toronto, they're a very large pension fund of some $130 billion, came into our business as a 70% shareholder. So we're obviously delighted with that outcome. That was concluded on the 30th of June, so only recently. And a listed Australian significant construction and infrastructure player known as Leighton Holdings is the 30% shareholder still. They did own 100%, they've sold down that 70% to teachers, as it's known, or Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. Our key focus within the business is really enterprise, government. We're a larger provider to government, large enterprises, multinationals. And where we started, our pedigree within NextGen is really a carrier's carrier. We're a significant provider of services, backhaul services and the like, to virtually all of the carriers in Australia, and many of those carriers are multinational. So, you know, we're dealing with the likes of the major global carriers, you know, such as Vodafone and many of the US carriers, providing them backhaul services. We also have an extensive local fibre network within a number of the key capital cities as well. I will point out that Australia Singapore Cable is a 100% owned subsidiary of the group, and it does have its own management team. But I was delighted to be able to be here in New York to speak to you today about the plans with ASC. So I'll jump into that now. Australia Singapore Cable. We announced this project a couple of years ago, and as many of you would know, when you build a cable that has to go through a number of international jurisdictions, it does take time to get those particular permits in place, etc. You can see here with this particular cable, it's coming from Singapore. The most immediate route is to come down there via Jakarta, via the Sunda Strait, and believe it or not, to come all the way down to Perth. It's actually more complex to go across to Darwin, so that was not a choice that we opted for. We decided to come down to Perth and connect into you know, the west coast of Australia. We then have a network, which is that red line that goes across from Perth. It's an existing fibre network that we've had for a number of years, that then will obviously connect the cable through to Sydney. Base configuration we're looking at is 3 fibre pairs, in other words 6 fibres total. We'll have a landing in Jakarta, which I've just mentioned, obviously Singapore and Perth. The cable system is planned to be ready for service in March 2015. And another thing we recently announced in the Australian marketplace is that we've upgraded or we're working through a project to upgrade our core Australian network to 100 gigabit wavelength technology. The original network was a 10 gig DWDM system, so in other words, on one fibre pair you'd have 80 by 10 gig. We're now moving to a system that's 88 by 100 gig. Obviously it's a lower cost system in terms of incremental bandwidth, but it also gives us much greater capacity moving forward. We have completed Melbourne, Sydney and Canberra. They are probably the 3 busiest cities in Australia, and we're now progressively rolling that network out to the rest, that upgrade out to the rest of the network as well. We just terabits per fibre pair. And I think the system that we're putting in is an 80. This is for the submarine component. It's an 80 by 100 gig wavelength system to give 8 terabits per fibre pair, 100 gig transponders, as I've mentioned. A good thing about this particular route is that you know, access from Sydney or Perth to Asia, the latency is going to be significantly lower than other systems out there today that access Asia via the east coast, and there's a number that do that. They'll either go via Guam or Hawaii and come back around. This is a more direct route. There is an existing cable there known as SeaMeWe3. SeaMeWe3 is a number of years old now, and more recently did have quite a significant outage as well. So, a number of benefits with this particular cable. Not only is it giving diversity to SeaMeWe3, but it's giving route diversity to the east coast as well, and the latency is quite a lot less than existing cables out there. Happy to take any technical questions a bit later on as well. We've been working on this particular project for a number of years. We've put a significant investment to date into this because we're a firm believer in this particular route and the opportunities that it provides. So as a result, we've fully completed our permits in Australia and Singapore. We're a licensed carrier in Singapore and obviously in Australia as well. And I'm delighted to announce today that we have signed a memorandum of understanding with our Indonesian partner, which is XL Axiata. And as a result, we've now provided a submission to the Ministry of Communications, and obviously we now need to work through that approval process with the Ministry and also with CCOM to obtain permit in principle, and our expectation is we should receive that by around about the end of November or into December. Many other aspects of the cable have already been completed. For instance, most of the pipeline crossings, as you would understand, you need to get crossing agreements with pipelines, have actually already been signed off. Supply contracts in place, and we've surveyed the route as well. What we're working through now is our customer pre-commitments, and I'm happy to say that we're getting very significant demand, and there's a lot of appeal for this particular cable for some of the reasons that I mentioned before. It does provide that diversity. The other thing too is there is a large increase, and we're seeing it year on year, of growth of traffic between Australia and Asia. And Australia is doing a lot of trade with Asia, but also this provides, if you like, another path to connect through from the US to Asia, what we call the southern route rather than the northern route, which may go, say, for instance, via Japan. The other thing that is happening in Australia, particularly in West Australia, is a continuing resources boom, both with minerals, with iron ore, but particularly with liquefied natural gas. Up in the northern part, in the offshore in Australia, there's a significant LNG developments occurring with most of the major players there. The likes of Chevrons, the Shells, etc., global players. So we expect to see Perth become a place where there's going to be major increases in bandwidth as well. So I think that's driving a lot of the commitment, or if you like, the desire by customers to take capacity on this particular cable. Our plan then is we do need to fine-tune the contract a little bit with our vendor. Then we expect to take that back for final approval by our shareholders in the December period this year, with a ready for service expected in March 2015. Being an open access cable, and that's something we're proud of with our heritage. I mean, if NextGen has really helped drive open access and wholesale services within the Australian marketplace. We don't have a consumer customer base, for instance, to protect. We're all about enabling broadband and the growth in broadband in the Australian marketplace. We want to bring that obviously into Asia and into Singapore and Indonesia as well. So we'll be providing services to carriers, and we're looking at selling services at either the 2.5 or the 10 gig level. The majority of demand, I must say, is at the 10 gig, multiple of 10 gig level that we're seeing from customers. I won't go into the detail on where these services will be available from, but suffice to say that all of the data centres, if you like, are really open access data centres. Indonesia, as an example, will be in the cyber centre in Indonesia, which really provides access to all of the national cables, the national infrastructure across Indonesia. Similarly with Singapore and Australia, these are open access facilities. So customers will be able to then connect into domestic network as well. So just to kind of wrap up, although this slide says Metronode is our data centre subsidiary, I really want to draw your attention here to the significant infrastructure that we have in Australia, and obviously how we can bring that to bear for ASC as well. So we have a significant, fully redundant network across Australia. It's a modern network. It's circa 10 years old or newer than that. Some of the new extensions that were done to places like Darwin, Townsville, you can see there on the coast in Queensland, are only a couple of years old. And we're upgrading our core network to 100 gigabit per second transponders. But you see from this picture as well, just the extensive data center data center capacity that we have across the country. In many of the major cities, we already have an existing data center. We're moving ahead now with building new generation, much lower power utilisation or PUE, but much higher power efficiency, and also high density data centres. We can handle 20, 25 kilowatts a rack as standard in these new generation data centres. And in some cases, you know, for instance in Sydney or in New South Wales, we just brought on board 2 new data centres. We had 1, so we got 3 there. Melbourne, we launched a significant data centre around about 6 or 8 months ago. We already had a significant data centre there. We're a firm believer in the growth that's going to occur between the data centres and the network. You know, this move to cloud ultimately is going to put huge pressure on both data centres and network to provide that capacity that underlines cloud services. So we're investing to be able to provide that infrastructure to support those types of services. One final thing I would just state for ASC is that ASC is really a cable that connects from Singapore to Sydney. And because we own the capacity between both Perth and Sydney, and we will own the cable all the way from Perth to Singapore, we will be selling customers an end-to-end service, not a disaggregated services. Obviously, those customers that want to take a service in Perth, that's fine, but many customers actually want to connect from Singapore into Sydney, and then from Sydney they can connect into many other cables that will connect into, say, the US or into Asia, but we will be providing IRUs all the way from Singapore to Sydney. That's all I wanted to say at this stage, but thanks once again to APTelecom for the opportunity to present today, and thank you for your attentiveness as well.
Thank you, Peter, very much for your presentation. Just a quick update before we proceed to the next presentation. We have so far 7 retweets of the event on our Twitter feed. We have 2 questions that have come in on Twitter for Peter that we're saving for the panel session. And I believe we have 6 likes on Facebook so far. So people are out there watching it around the world. And again, that's one of the beauties of our industry, is using the technology, using the streaming, using the submarine cables to provide virtual connectivity for the haves and the have-nots, and bridge that digital divide in many places in the world. Okay. Without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage our next presenter, Tom Soja, who I had the pleasure of meeting about 10 years ago at PTC in Honolulu, in Hawaii. Tom is an industry expert, recognized for his expertise in the submarine cable space. He holds an undergraduate degree from the University of Rochester and his MBA from Babson College in Boston. Tom, please come to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. It was great to be here this morning and to see so many longtime friends here in the audience that I haven't seen in some time. Boy, the pressure's on, isn't it, with the tweets? I hope you're not going to announce how many dislikes are on the tweets. But I'm here, of course, I'm a vice president for Ocean Specialists based in Stuart, Florida. We're a 20-company organization that's part of a 150-strong larger group that does project management and environmental assessment studies. Our role with Angola Cables is as an advisor to them in the construction and development of the company and in a couple of exciting new cable projects that I'm going to talk about today. So, boa tarde to my friends in Angola. It's afternoon there now, and hello to you all. So a little bit about Angola Cables. The company is a wholesale carrier. It was established in 2009. It's driven by its shareholders and the government's strategy to transform Angola into a major hub of traffic in Africa. Angola Cables is backed by 5 of the major telecom companies in Angola: APTelecom, Unitel, which is a wireless carrier, MS Telecom, a subsidiary of Sonangol, Movicel, another mobile operator, and StarTel. Its mission is to support the development of the telecom sector not only in Angola but also in Africa, and to provide reliable, high bandwidth connectivity for its shareholders and any other major operator or enterprise company in Angola, but also for the region. Just to give you a little bit of flavor of Angola, Angola, like the rest of Africa, is a relatively young country population-wise. Population of about 19 million people. Think about this for a second. About nearly two-thirds, it's actually 64% of the population is less than 25 years of age. Think about that. 2 out of every 3 people you meet less than 25 years of age. So very young, very energetic population. In terms of growth, it's going to probably grow to about 22 million in the next few years, roughly doubling by 2050 to about 44 million are the projections. Right now, mobile phone penetration is about 70%, about the same level as the rest of Africa. But internet penetration is still relatively small, lagging a little bit behind the rest of the continent at 12%. I think the broad average for Africa is about 15%. But the good news is that the 3G and 4G networks that support the mobile connectivity, and that's the major way that people interact with the internet these days in the emerging markets. It's not through sitting at a laptop or a desktop computer. So there's a lot of headroom to grow yet. A lot of bandwidth will be needed in the future. The way we see that bandwidth being provided is really a strategy around what we call AngoNAP. AngoNAP is a major internet access point within Angola. It was built and established in Luanda, the capital city of Angola. It is where all of the submarine cables come into, serving the country, and it's the host for the Angolan domain name .ao. From AngoNAP, we can provide, when I say we, Angola Cables, can provide national connectivity, all of the fiber networks throughout the country that are needed to support the mobile networks and the fixed line networks come into Luanda. We can provide national connectivity, regional connectivity, and international connectivity globally. Provide IP transit, cross-connect services, all the data center stuff that our first speaker was just talking about a moment ago. So the vision for Angola Cables is to be the neutral access point for connectivity in Africa. And you can see, I don't have a pointer, but you can see the Angola in capitals there. That's where Angola is located, just in case you don't happen to know your African geography. But it's situated ideally for connectivity to the Americas. Luanda in Angola is one of the fastest growing economies in the world today. And in all the networks, including the WAX cable, SAT3, and our new SAX cable that will go across to Brazil, are going to connect through Luanda and through Angola. So first, let me talk about WAX. Even though Angola Cables is a relatively new company, just established in 2009, like I said, it's only been operational as a company for the last 2 years. But already it's a major investor in the WAX cable. WAX was a $650 million network connecting about 10 countries in West Africa and 3 more landings in the Canary Islands, Portugal, and UK in Europe. Angola Cables was one of the tier 1 investors, investing over $90 million into this system. So we've got lots of capacity on the WAX system that we're already managing and providing services over today already while we're developing other cables. Again, its connectivity is available in ANGONAP in Luanda, and we can reach any other of the other countries where the WAX system lands. That system, by the way, was turned on and inaugurated a year ago this past June, June 2012 in Luanda. The next 2 cables that we're working on with Angola Cables is SAX and Cable of the Americas. These 2 will provide the first, really the first opportunity to connect Africa directly to the Americas without going through Europe. There are other cables. There's one other cable, the Atlantis 2, quite an old cable that goes from Brazil, but that's really going more directly to Europe than serving Africa. But SAX, South Atlantic Cable System, will be the first direct connectivity over to Brazil, and Cable of the Americas will carry that capacity directly to the United States through Florida. So the SAX configuration is a 4-fiber pair cable system. And as you know, with today's technology, we can put 100 by 100 gigabits of transmission capacity on that cable. It'll be capable of doing that from day one. That gives you 40 gigabits if you 40 gigabits of capacity. If I'm sorry, 40 terabits per second of capacity. If you do the math, obviously I can't do the math. And we fully expect that in a few years' time that will increase as the technology allows, which will give plenty of capacity across the South Atlantic region. Again, it'll have direct connectivity in Fortaleza, Brazil, and it will have access points at the ANGONAP in Angola. Cable of the Americas, similar type deal. There we're looking at 2 fiber pairs. Again, it's 100 by 100, so 20 terabits of capacity. Again, going between Brazil and the United States. We fully expect that the SAX cable will interconnect with other cables in Brazil, so we don't have to have exactly one-to-one matching connectivity all on one cable system. So 2 fiber pairs will do us just fine on the Cable of the Americas. Both of these cables are sort of going down the tracks in parallel, so to speak. We expect to sign supply contracts for the SAX cable before the end of this year and early next year for the Cable of the Americas. Both will come into service in the mid to late 2015 timeframe. Again, this is kind of the picture that you know, probably the most important point I want to leave with you today is the connectivity that we have both up and down the west coast of Africa and directly across to the Americas, to both South America and to North America through Florida. All of this will be one integrated service offering that we can provide, including not only the raw capacity between points, but also the data centers in ANGONAP, and a place where already we're seeing a strong demand from the content providers for putting servers in Angola for Africa. So that's really the main points of the presentation that I wanted to cover. And if you have any questions, be happy to answer either now or later during the panel session. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Great presentation. And so far, we've seen Indonesia, Australia, Singapore with Peter's presentation. We've seen Brazil, West Africa, Angola, and then onward connectivity from Brazil to the United States into Florida. Our folks at Angola Cables have a video that we will be playing. It's about a 3-minute video after the panel session. So at this time, we're going to start the panel session, and we are exactly on target in terms of scheduling. So if anybody, while I'm talking and bringing up the panelists to the stage, if anybody wants to top up their coffee, or anybody that's streaming in somewhere around the world needs to make any adjustments, we'll give everybody a few seconds. And I will call to the stage our first panelist representing TE Subcom. Here today, Dave Robles. I had the pleasure and privilege of working with Dave years ago when he was based in Paris in Europe. And Dave is managing director for TE Subcom. Dave is fluent in French and Spanish. He's a graduate of Towson University as undergraduate, and he has a master's degree in engineering from the University of Rochester. So please join me in welcoming, yes, he's a fellow Rochester graduate like you, Tom. So you guys have a lot to talk about on the panel. Please welcome Dave to the stage and give him a round of applause. I've already introduced Peter and Tom, but once again, Peter McGrath, CEO of NextGen. Peter, if you could please come to the stage, and Tom Soja. The moderator of the panel is becoming quite the international submarine cable moderator. My partner Sean Bergen moderated the panel in Singapore a couple weeks ago, and he's becoming quite the moderator, as I mentioned. But Sean has a fairly distinguished background in submarine cables. He was part of the original team that built the Australia-Japan cable that transit Guam. Sean has an MBA from the Australian Graduate School of Management, and prior to founding APTelecom, he ran BT's business for wholesale in Southeast Asia. So please welcome Sean Bergen to the stage.
Thanks, Eric. Well, we've heard a little bit about Angola, Africa. We've heard a little bit about Southeast Asia and Australia, but I thought it'd be a good opportunity to drill down a little bit and look at some of the opportunities in these emerging markets, and get some opinions of our learned experts here that we have at our disposal today. So with that in mind, and keeping the monetisation aspect in mind, which is near and dear to what Eric and I focus on, Tom, I'll start with you. And gentlemen, once Tom's answered the question, please feel free to jump in if you will. And also, members of the audience, if you'd like to ask any questions, please feel free to stick your hand in the air and we'll come and grab you. Tom, beyond Angola, what opportunities do you believe exist in Africa that have yet to be capitalised on?
Well, thanks for the question. There's a couple of things come to mind. Obviously, there's been a lot of activity in Africa building submarine cables in the last 5-10 years. Most of them go north and south. We've got SAT-3, WAX, Main 1, GLOW 1. We've got FT Orange building their system, ACE. We hear NBN, also building on the west coast going north-south. So, you know, the east-west corridor hasn't been given much play at all. We've seen a lot of announcements of systems, but, you know, that's what kind of creates the opportunity for something like SACS. That's one aspect. Of course, the challenge there is coming up with the right business model, and that applies equally to oil and gas networks. The oil and gas industry is big in Africa. It's one of the main sources of energy production these days. We at Ocean Specialists are working on 4 networks today, 4 fiber optic offshore networks to serve Africa, 2 in West Africa, 1 in Southern Africa, and 1 in Northern Africa. So we've got that going on. There's also the opportunity to connect some of the inland countries. Because of the broad coverage of the mobile networks in Angola, we've got fiber optic networks reaching out to the countryside. All of the major cities are connected by fiber, and those networks can go up to the borders and cross the borders, and we're working very hard on making that happen to provide connectivity across the continent. I think one of the opportunities is to create some of the Pan-African networks, similarly to what we saw about 10, 15 years ago in the Pan-European market. So those are some of the opportunities that we see in the African region.
Just to expand a bit, just for some of the financial analysts in the room, can you contextualise the value of some of these new builds that are being touted at the moment and proposed at the moment in terms of the total investment in the region from an infrastructure perspective, just on those cables you mentioned?
Now you're challenging my math skills again. We're probably talking on the order of maybe $1 to $2 billion US dollars total investment, something like that. But between commercial systems, oil and gas, the terrestrial networks, that can get quite expensive too, depending on how extensive you want to get. But yeah, I mean it's major investment. Yeah.
So we're talking somewhere in the order of $2 billion just in that neck of the woods of announced or proposed builds at this point in time. So in terms of opportunity, that's massive. I'd challenge us to think of any other industry that's spending that sort of money in this economic environment. It's quite interesting. Does anyone have any questions for Tom?
Well, yeah. Well, Steve, that's a very good question. The backhaul open access is the model that Angola Cables is promoting for its network access. The Sangano Beach landing station for the WAX system and will be the same cable station where we bring in SACs. We've got redundant fiber from 2 different providers going from there to the city center where AngoNAP is. When we put in SACs, we will also have terrestrial capacity between SACs and SAT3 and WAX from Sangano. We'll also have a wet piece because we're going to put a branch offshore of the SAC system so that we can tie those two together. In other countries, WAX was built as a consortium, so as you probably realize, that means capacity up to the cable station usually. So we have to work with in-country partners in each case to provide the backhaul for those who want to reach the key POPs in West Africa that it connects. We're also looking and working with Sean and Eric to looking at network extensions off of the WAX in other places where customers want to go to provide the end-to-end service.
I think to expand on that further, Steve, Angola's in a very unique position geographically in Africa on the west coast. It's almost halfway down, and it does touch a number of inland countries. And with its shareholder structure, you've got five telcos involved there, and they've effectively got fibre to the border, and it touches many of those inland countries. So the vision, as one of the previous slides showed, was a terrestrial build straight across. Then you can access those systems on the east coast and get into Asia, and effectively create a bypass for the Middle East and an alternate route straight across to the US. So that's the vision to a large extent. Any other questions for Tom? No? Okay. We'll move on to Peter. Peter, the Next Gen Group's invested a significant amount of money into this ASC project up to Asia. And I suppose what's in the back of my mind, and probably many people's minds, is you've got significant infrastructure in Australia with the Metronode asset and also with the Next Gen fibre assets. How does the Next Gen Group plan to leverage off that connectivity into Indonesia and Singapore?
Okay, well, thanks, Sean, for that question. I think I could probably broaden the answer a little bit. We see Indonesia as a really interesting market, and I think we're not the only ones. I think many global carriers, many of the large content providers see Indonesia as a very interesting market. You know, there's some 250 million people live in Indonesia. They have very low PC penetration today, of something like 7%, but they have a very high uptake of phones. So, you know, the first wave of growth, I think, that is currently underway within Indonesia, and we're going to see more of that, is with smartphones. And clearly the big content providers see Indonesia as a market that's going to experience significant growth over time, particularly as you see the economy improve and you see Indonesia become more industrialised over time. I think the second wave will clearly be then broadband connections. I did mention that they have a low PC penetration in Indonesia, but as that improves, as obviously the GDP per capita improves within Indonesia, you'll see greater PC penetration, and obviously a number of carriers are looking at deploying fixed broadband networks as well. So, you know, that'll be the second big wave. Important country as well for multinationals. Multinationals moving into Indonesia clearly need key infrastructure. You know, they need to be able to communicate back to head office, etc. So Indonesia is a really interesting market. It's interesting for us because we can help enable that growth and that connection into Indonesia. When we look to move the cable or plan to bring the cable from Singapore through Indonesian waters to Australia, our plan initially was not to connect into Indonesia. We did have a plan to connect into Indonesia, into Jakarta, but that was really a phase 2. The Indonesian authorities, when we spoke to them, said, well, we would actually like the cable to come into Indonesia, which made a lot of sense. We needed to have a local partner to do that, and you heard earlier that we've chosen our local partner. We think they're a very like-minded player. They share the same views as we do in terms of the growth and the opportunities within the market. They already have significant exposure into the mobile area as well, and so there was a lot there that we shared together. Working with the Indonesians has been a great experience. It's been very positive, and you know, they've typically stuck to what they've said in terms of what we needed to do, and we've now arrived at this position where we're ready to move forward in Indonesia. I think the other thing too that we have with our cable and we see as exciting as for Indonesia, it's going to give them a number of options as a country, and for the local operators as well as for the global operators who want to connect into Indonesia. There's a diversity there. Yes, you can connect from Singapore to Indonesia today. Typically those cables are not open access though. They're owned by a national operator or whatever. So we'll be providing the first open access cable, so you can access the rest of the world from Jakarta either via Singapore or you can come via Australia. So we think that added diversity is going to be a real plus as well. So look, I think you know, the growth that we see, the opportunities for the Next Gen Group is fairly obvious. We can use the cable ourselves to then expand into Singapore, into Indonesia. But I think the opportunities for the wider market place, Sean, is where the real exciting area is here for the rest of the market, for the global carriers, for the content providers. to be able to get open access into Indonesia, and it's really a long-term growth potential, that market.
And Peter, just to I suppose expand a little bit more in terms of the route, as we know, you mentioned CMU E3. It's been a pretty thin route in the past. This is a brand new cable, new technology. The demand that you're seeing from the marketplace, is it just telcos? Or are we seeing other sorts of entities like CDN players, or?
Yeah, we're probably not going to go into our full list of prospects, Sean. But the demand, it's clear there's another category of buyer out there today purchasing capacity. It's not just the carriers. It is others who are moving into that space, content type providers. That's clear. Some of their intentions are well known. But they're seeing, the amount of capacity and the demands that are being placed on them. So yes, they're wanting to move into submarine cables as well. Our position is we want to help, provide this open access cable that's going to drive the bandwidth that really many users are wanting, and obviously many of the providers of content are wanting as well. In some cases, they'll buy via other telcos. In some cases, they'll buy directly.
Yes, as somebody who visits Indonesia on a monthly basis, I'm looking forward to your cable coming into service, because the quality of services that are currently provided domestically in Indonesia aren't that good. So it's wonderful to have another cable coming in to expand their horizons. Are there any questions from the audience with regard to Peter's comments?
I'm Dave Robles from TE Subcom. Just curious, going back to the Indonesia situation, I noticed in your presentation you talked about permits for Singapore, permits for Australia, and I know that Indonesia has some very special challenges on the permitting side, cabotage laws regarding vessels. So could you just say a couple words about how you're tackling the permitting issues and what you think the status of that is at the moment?
Yes, happy to do that. So the Indonesian regulators, as I mentioned before, made it clear that you really need to land a cable in Indonesia to be able to bring a cable, particularly a cable that comes all the way along the coast of Indonesia, past Jakarta, through the Sunda Strait down to Australia. That was a change from how things used to be previously. I think there are a number of cables that do just go through the waters of Indonesia. Maybe there was a view historically from Indonesia that they didn't necessarily need access to those cables. I think in this particular case, because it does provide diversity to Singapore, they may have taken a view that this would be a good cable to get connected into Jakarta, and I think that's fine. I think that's an appropriate response from the Indonesian authorities. So the first step was we had to get a local partner. Now that was an important thing. Due to various conditions in Indonesia, it would be very difficult, I think, to think that you could go into Indonesia yourself and license and run your own business there. So they generally want you to work with a local partner. So we have done that. We've chosen the local partner. We've signed an agreement with them, and we've submitted our applications now to the ministry. And we'll also, I believe, we either have submitted or we're in the process of submitting our application then to CCOM. So that's really the process that needs to be followed until we had our local partner, and that local partner then needs to agree to take on a number of responsibilities. In actual fact, they're the landing party partner, so they will represent the business in Indonesia, and obviously we have a commercial arrangement in place with them. And then they will put the case before the Indonesians. We have a landing place that's been determined, and that's at Anya Beach, and that's been agreed. So we've already moved forward on that particular location. So the remaining components is really just probably the permit in principle from CCOM. And we're feeling very comfortable now with our Indonesian partner that we will be receiving that permit shortly. Yep.
Any further questions? Sure.
We wanted to give the audience that's not in the room a chance to ask some of their questions, because there are quite a few. And the Twitter feed, the first question is in Hong Kong with Reliance Communications. And those of you that know Fabrizio as a good ally of APTelecom, we promised him the first question. So I'm going to direct that to Matt, if you could come up.
Thanks, Eric. And on behalf of Fabrizio, he wanted to know how you guys foresee financing in the submarine cable industry to change over the next year.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Matt. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Fabrizio, but I appreciate the question. When I joined the industry in the late 90s, the submarine cable contract was the culmination of a financing process. And usually you came to the cable installer with the financing package all in hand, and the project moved ahead right away. Now what's happened is the signature of the supply contract, from our perspective, is just one step in the process of getting the financing. It's an essential step often to show the viability of the project, to nail down the cost, the schedule, etc. So it's become, we've become one step on that path to realizing the project. So that's forced us into a very different role on the supply side of having to support our customers with their with approaches to finance, sometimes approaches to the government, for example, via Export-Import Bank in Washington, D.C. We've taken all those steps now on a routine basis with many of our customers. So it's really changed the game for us quite a bit. Going forward, I don't see this changing actually in the near future. Unless the credit situation vastly improves, I think this is going to become a routine part of our business. And so we've gotten pretty good at it, actually helping our customers approach the banks, approach governments for that kind of funding. So that's the way our business has changed.
So from that perspective, your business model to a large extent has had to change with market conditions. So now you're not simply being approached by potential customers looking to buy a system from you and have you build it for them. You're actually having to become part of that enablement process for them.
Exactly, yeah.
I might comment a little bit about that too, because we're on the other side of the table from David on a couple of projects. And when you talk about enablement, in the emerging markets, particularly in Africa, and I mean, we've seen this for going on 20 years now doing projects in Africa. One of the important parts about that enablement process is not to just come in, build a submarine cable, and goodbye, see you later. It's to really establish the local expertise. Local content in the construction, that's great. That's an important part of what we're pressing our suppliers on. But it's also providing the local knowledge transfer and expertise from wherever that is in the world, whether it's from Europe, America, Asia, anywhere, to get the best and the brightest resources behind the project to make it successful. And no matter who's putting up the financing, and in the case of Angola Cables, we have no doubt we have the solid backing of the Angolan government. For the SAX cable, it's a very high-level project, same level of exposure and commitment on the Brazilian side of that. But to get get that knowledge transfer to build up, again, as I said in my presentation, Angola Cables has come from really 0 employees just a couple of years ago up to, I think we're 60, 65 employees now, just within Angola Cables in the country. We've got to get everyone up to speed. Not everyone is an expert on international telecom or even submarine cable, but that's a very important part, not only the financing, but the expertise to pull it off as a project, as it were, and we're all pulling together to make that happen.
Is there any comments or questions on financing cable systems from the audience at all, or any further comments with regard to that? Well, if not, I'll move straight on to Dave. Dave, we've talked a bit about Africa. We've talked about Asia. I'd like to talk about Latin America and that part of the world now, and that's right. That's your cup of tea. What opportunities do you believe exist currently in that LATAM market that people should be keeping their eye on?
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I'm responsible for sales throughout the Americas region, and one of the striking things for me is how few new initiatives have been launched in Latin America relative to other parts of the world. When we look at the infrastructure around the continent, around South America and Central America as well, and you'll see this in my presentation in a little while, all the infrastructure that's out there was built 12, 13, 14 years ago with the older generation of technology. Most of it 10 gig, but a lot of it was built to support 2.5 gig. And much of that infrastructure is sort of reaching the end of its upgrade life. And I would have expected by this time we'd see more initiatives to pull together consortia or individual entrepreneurs to go out and build new systems in the very near future. And we're just not seeing that yet. There have been a couple systems announced in the past few years, but they have not come online yet. I don't exactly know the status. I think they may be a bit behind schedule, but we're still waiting for those to go live. In the meantime, I think for many countries, Peru, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Chile, as well as Brazil, there's a big question mark there as to when these cables are going to go live, what's going to fill that hole. So I see enormous opportunities going forward for investors interested in getting into that market. And I haven't even touched on the Caribbean. If the size of the South American projects is too big, take a look at the Caribbean market, where a lot of cable systems require $10 to $20 million of funding to go ahead. And I've spoken with many folks in that area who are dying for a cable to have some alternative, a selection of cable providers, because many of these nations are kind of blocked into a single operator model at the moment.
So you mentioned that these countries are working with very old technology. There hasn't been the investment made in the region. What do you put that down to? Compared to markets like intra-Asia and Africa, why aren't we seeing that same level of enthusiasm towards the Latin American market?
It's an excellent question. I mean, this industry has always gone in waves. We all recognize that. There's a 4 to 5 year cycle. I've lived through a couple of those cycles in my career. And I think we're starting to see some indication of that demand, but I think the credit crunch of 2008 and 2009 has really had a lasting effect. And when we think about emerging markets, instinctively, I think we turn to Africa, we turn to Asia-Pac. I think South America's been less of a focus just because maybe there's an impression that the infrastructure exists. But my message is that, yes, it's there, but it's getting quite old. And if we don't do something in the next 2 to 3 years, some of these countries are going to become bandwidth limited very shortly.
I suppose a follow-on question that I'd ask on that is, given the limitation of the cables that are in the water, the fact there aren't that many new builds on the horizon for that part of the world, what's that doing to bandwidth prices in that part of the world compared to markets where we have multiple routes?
It's a little bit out of my zone, but I think bandwidth prices have been dropping steadily, and I think in part this is a strategy by some of the current operators to keep prices at a level that just discourages new builds. There is a lot of unlit bandwidth out there in the water right now. Again, it's older technology, so it's limited in what it can do, and these systems are only designed to operate for 25 years. We're now about halfway through that, so something's got to come online. But I think if you're operating a network around South America right now, it's in your interest to keep those prices just low enough that the next cable isn't going to go in. So there's a bit of a game going on right now for that.
Any questions regarding that part of the world, that market? Any comments in general? Okay, Eric, do we have any further questions that we'd like to ask? Jerry. Okay. I wish you'd asked a much shorter question. What Jerry's asking is, with I suppose it's about vendors at the end of the day, and the question is, we have a lot of new vendors coming into the submarine cable space, such as Huawei and others, and how is that impacting on the industry and the selection of vendors?
Yes, look, I'm happy to put our perspective on that. I don't really want to comment on any specific vendors per se negatively. We, within the NextGen group, have chosen, there's a number of vendors that we would probably look to use. We do provide services to, as I mentioned before, large enterprise and government. And so, we look for things like, we do look for track record, we do look for reliability, and also, with the types of customers that we have, we need to be careful with the type of equipment that we deploy as well. So, in our particular case, we tend to use Lucent, Alcatel Lucent gear, and we found that to be very reliable, and we've had a relationship with them that probably goes back 10 years or so. That's our particular case. I know other carriers and other operators would have different views on that, so I don't want to generalise. And I probably don't want to talk about other providers per se, but it's probably true to say that the commentary that you see in the press, they're the things that people think about and obviously take into account as well.
Yeah, I guess as a cable buyer developer, I can comment on that. In our case, I can talk about the SAX cable for one instance. In that case, that's the first cable going across from the South Atlantic from Africa, between the continents, Africa to South America. As much as we want to be leading edge in doing new things, doing the latest thing, in that particular case, we made a decision to be very conservative because there's no alternative route there. And if a cable goes down for any reason, and not even getting into the security issues or whatever you might imagine, that could be issues with some suppliers. But we wanted to really go with the track record, just like Peter said, extremely important to us. On other routes, maybe could be a little bit more free thinking about that, say. But that really drove our decision making to go with suppliers who have done 6,000 kilometer systems, 7,000 kilometer systems, 12,000 kilometer systems. So we didn't want to take a chance with that. So that more so drives the issue than some of the others. I think, and I think some of the suppliers who have either relatively new or in some cases brand new product out there on the wet plant side, it's a tough road to hoe. We went that route back in the noughties with Red Sky Technologies, who was trying to introduce a new wet plant technology, small form factor repeater, at exactly the time when the industry was pretty much flatlining. Maybe it wasn't the right time for that, but still, you have to prove your track record a little bit at a time, and that's tough, especially when, on the financing side, say you may have sources of financing who are ultra conservative. The days of submarine cables as the go-go, latest flavor of the month to throw your money into is long gone. But there are pockets of financing out there, and some of those are infrastructure funds. And if you know the infrastructure funds, they're very conservative. They want something that works for sure, and they're willing to take a longer-term perspective, a longer-term view on their return on investment. It's not the typical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's more like 10, 15-year view of the world. So they want something they know is going to last. It's going to be there. So that kind of drives some of the decision making. At least in the cases that I can talk about. Those are commercial systems. To talk about oil and gas, it's even worse in terms of conservatism. In wanting tried and true solutions to what you're doing.
Dave, I'm sure you have a comment with regard to this one.
I do indeed. as the only U.S.-based supplier for turnkey systems, we encourage everyone to buy American. So it's as simple as that. But look, I mean, our equipment's been deployed all over the world. In just about every country that has a coast, you can find our equipment, and so we haven't really encountered any particular problems from our perspective. And like Peter, I'm reluctant to comment on other vendor situations.
Yeah, look, I think I could just re-emphasise the comments that were made. I think particularly nowadays, you know, financiers are involved, and whether they're sponsors on the equity side or whether they're banks, you know, one of the big things they're going to look at is risk. And so they really turn to management, people like me, and then we turn to the vendors to say, well, you know, we need to be able to assure the sponsors and the financiers that, you know, that this technology is well refined and well known, and I think that's the response I tend to give, you know, our shareholders and financiers, that, you know, submarine cable technology has been around about 100 years or so, give or take 20, 30, 40, 50 years or so, but circa that period. And so you really do want, in my view, as a user, and it is different for different cables, particularly for short haul or specific applications, you know, to connect a land mass that might be, you know, 10 or 20 miles from shore. You don't really need any active electronics, so you can use passive systems more so. But for long haul systems that you want to last for 25 years, that are going to cost you hundreds of millions of dollars, you can't, not only can you as you know, as the company deploying it, take the risk, but your sponsors and financiers won't let you. And you know, the reality is there's probably only a few turnkey providers around, and Tyco's clearly, you know, one of the leading ones as well, without a doubt.
Well, I think that provides the perfect segue into the next session. And we'll just bring the podium back, and I'd like to thank our panellists for joining us. So if you give them a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you to all the panelists. As I mentioned briefly after Tom Soja's presentation for Angola Cables, we're going to play a brief 3.5 minute video on Angola, what's going on in Angola. Both Sean and I had the opportunity to visit Angola earlier this year, so please enjoy the video.
Strategically located on the west coast of Africa, Angola, the 7th largest country in Africa, 27th in the world. More than 1,200,000 square kilometers, 1,600 kilometers of coastline, nearly 18.5 million inhabitants, with 44% under 15 years of age. With a GDP of over $115 billion and an estimated growth in GDP for 2012 of 6.8%. With the fastest growing economy in Africa, with Moody's giving a positive rating and the IMF predicting that Angola will be one of 3 countries that will grow most this year. Deeply influenced by Western culture, both from the contact it had with almost 500 years of Portuguese colonization and by the emotional relationship it has with Brazil, Angola became an independent nation in 1975. It has vast natural resources such as phosphates, iron, copper, gold and diamonds, and is already the largest producer of oil in Africa. For some years, Angola lived through a turbulent period. However, today it is a politically and socially stable state and is seen by many as a regional power. It is a country that lives today in peace as a nation, with a deep commitment to national reconstruction. In the last 10 years, Angola has invested heavily in infrastructure, services, housing, and health, and has rehabilitated more than 5,000 kilometers of roads, rebuilt 2,700 kilometers of railroads, and more than 148 train stations, reconstructed airports and seaports, developed the entire telecommunications sector, created special economic zones in order to promote the establishment of new business, built high schools and universities across the whole country, built and equipped hospitals, maternity clinics and health centers across the country, developed housing for young people. Some time ago, Angola defined telecommunications as a strategic area of development. With a privileged geographical location, the country has positioned itself as the telecommunications hub of Africa. With the wax cable going into operation through the Sangano station in Angola, the country seeks to meet the growing needs of the African continent, as well as the connections between Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Here is a country worth investing in. Here is Angola, a country of the future.
So to our team in Angola Cables in Luanda, hope you're able to see the video. It appears that you guys did. Just a quick count in terms of the number of folks that we have dialing in right now. We're approaching 80 folks globally, and the countries are, we believe, sorry, it's gone up 85. We think over 41 countries. So just wanted to provide that to everyone. Moving on, we're running ahead of schedule. So given that everyone's busy, we're going to be able to end the program a little bit earlier. Sean is going to be talking about Indonesia. And while Sean comes up to the stage, Stacy from the North 6 Agency is just going to mingle throughout all the tables to make sure that anybody that has not, and Jeff, you can't put your name card in there, all right? You can't win because you're picking, you're drawing. But anybody that has not dropped their business card in, feel free to drop it into the bowl because the lucky draw is going to happen right after Sean's brief overview on Indonesia. Sean's going to provide, sorry, Dave, skipped yours. Just 1 second. Sean's going to provide a brief overview specifically on Indonesia. We talked a little bit about what's going on in Angola, but we wanted to provide a bit of a overview with regards to Indonesia, which is obviously another emerging market with a tremendous amount of potential and a lot going on there. The ASC cable will be landing in Indonesia, and we'd like to welcome back to the podium Sean.
Thanks, guys. Following this presentation, we'll have a presentation from TE Subcom and highlighting what's happening in the Latin American market. But we've just seen the video, and Tom's talked about what's happening in Africa. I just wanted to, I suppose, reinforce. We've talked a little bit about Indonesia because of our connection with Australia-Singapore cable. But the reality is Indonesia is a very, very interesting place in its own right, and it warrants looking at in a little bit of detail. We'll just go through a couple of slides here. But we have a population of 270 million people. That's getting pretty close to America. I mean, we've 312, 313 million, I believe the latest stats are here. So it's a massive population. They've got well less than 10% internet penetration and PC ownership. It's well below 10%. I think we're talking about 7% for internet penetration and about 6% for PC ownership. So that in itself, with 250 million people with those sorts of stats, creates a very interesting opportunity for a lot of people. There are currently 2 fibre to the X rollouts, I'll call them, underway at the moment in Indonesia, where there's certain activity in places like Jakarta, with metro area networks being rolled out, fibre to the home being rolled out in the outlying suburbs, and also on one of the other islands, one of the large islands called Sumatra. They're doing the same thing there in places like Medan. So there's massive investment going on there. In addition to that, you do actually have the oil and gas industry, and Tom touched on that, and sometimes it's a below the radar level of activity. We always talk about the carrier involvement in the submarine cable space, but do not underestimate how heavily the O&G guys get involved in this. Discrete builds, very specialised builds, but they are spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year developing their own networks. I suppose that last paragraph's quite telling. 2013, up to 300 gig of active traffic with 100% year-on-year growth. And that's predominantly between Indonesia and Singapore. The predominant, I suppose, usage of that capacity is purely IP transit. So it's literally people using their mobile phones in Indonesia wanting to access the internet. The most cost-effective place for carriers to access the global internet is via Singapore currently. And once again, with ASC coming online, that's certainly going to help from a competitive perspective and reduce price points in Indonesia. From our perspective, we've seen IP transit prices in Indonesia fall dramatically over the last 5 years. 4 years ago, carriers were paying in the order of $400 a meg a month for internet, for IP transit out of Jakarta. Today, they're paying about $22 a meg. So that's a massive price reduction. I'm not sure all of that's been passed on to the consumers, but I'm sure a large percentage of that has. And as more cables come online, we'll see further reductions. And as those reductions come into play, cheaper smartphones enter the local market, and the Chinese manufacturers get involved, we're going to see explosive growth in these markets. So one of the metrics APTelecom always looks at in emerging markets is the smartphone penetration, because to a large extent that's going to drive bandwidth and that's going to drive builds of new systems. As an example of the sort of activity that's going on in Indonesia beyond ASC doing the international connectivity, there's a lot of activity underway there too to bolster the domestic infrastructure, particularly across Sumatra and Java. Those two islands, between them, have about 175 million people just across those two islands, which is huge. And I've literally been in places in Sumatra where I've seen people driving around the block in their car with a cigarette lighter adapter plugged into their mobile to charge their phones because their homes don't have power. So we're literally talking about enabling a country with things like ASC. And something else that's going on, there's a new network that's just been built. To give you an idea of the sort of investments that people are getting involved in there, Trans-Indonesia Networks formed a company about 3 years ago, and they've fibered up both Sumatra and Java with around 5,000 kilometres of fibre, predominantly on the backbone, predominantly as a backbone for a mobile network operator. So what we've got is a situation where you've got this mobile infrastructure going in place. Currently, all the mobile towers are interconnected with things like microwave, copper, wet string, jam tins, whatever they can get their hands on. These guys have rolled out a fibre network across both islands, and by default have now got 60 POPs across both islands. So this sort of investment in the range of $100 million is the sort of thing people are looking at now to capitalise on these emerging markets. Also, multinational corporations have always struggled with Indonesia in terms of B-end termination into Indonesia. A lot of these corporations aren't in Jakarta. They're operating in places like Surabaya, Medan, Pekanbaru, middle of nowhere. So now we're starting to see this investment come along, and I'd certainly suggest that all of you keep your eye on Indonesia, because I'm certainly seeing it becoming a powerhouse in the telecoms industry. And on the back of that, I'd like to hand over to Dave, unless anyone has any questions about Indonesia. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, Sean. Before I invite Dave up to the podium again, just want to thank Dave for some of his insightful comments. I think we've had a strong focus on Africa, so certainly a strong focus on Australia, Indonesia, in Singapore. But one thing that we thought of in the planning session for the event here at the State of Subsea event was that we wanted to provide global transfer of knowledge and really what's going on in markets. And as Dave had some excellent comments from the panel session about Central and South America and those emerging markets and what's going on, it may not be particularly your cup of tea, it may be, but we definitely want to provide global coverage. So it's not just seen as an Asia or an Africa event series. So we are very grateful to have Dave and his insightful comments. He had some great comments on the panel. And once again, if we can give Dave a round of applause as he comes back up to the stage.
Thanks a lot, Eric. You kind of stole my thunder by flipping through my slides here before I got up, but that's okay. That's all right. So just pretend you've never seen these before. There's one of our cable ships. That's the Reliance, cable ship Reliance. She is one of 6 identical cable ships in our fleet. It took me years to learn to call the ships she, but they hammered that into me in the Marine group. I've been asked to come up and give a few comments about what we do at SubCom. There's a real cross-section of expertise and backgrounds here in the audience. So I'm primarily speaking to those of you who maybe don't have so much experience or maybe entering from the financial or regulatory side of things. And so consider this a little tutorial, and then we'll get into the emerging market slides. So TE SubCom has been building undersea cables for over 50 years now. Starting out as a division of AT&T before being acquired by Tyco International and now becoming a part of TE Connectivity, which is on the New York Stock Exchange traded under TEL. If you want to look it up, the company's doing very well, very financially stable. We've deployed almost 500,000 kilometers of cable since our inception, and this is fiber optic cable, so since the mid-'80s. And they tell me that that's enough to circle the world something like 12 times at the equator, just to give you an idea. That's a hell of a lot of cable. As I said earlier on the panel, we are the only US-based supplier of turnkey systems. And because of our longevity in the market, we were actually involved in setting a lot of the standards for how cables are installed, maintained, recovered, etc. So things like jointing standards or transmission standards, we actually helped develop a lot of that. With our international competitors. So here's a quick map, and if you want a copy of this, we've got printouts here on the table. Please take one when you go out. But this gives you an idea of the scope of supply and our experience. There you see all the blue lines are cables that we've been specifically involved in one way or another, either on deployment, maintenance, or upgrades. And the very fine gray lines that you can't see very well are the other cables. So it looks like a lot of cables out there, right? There's a lot of infrastructure existing, but as I said earlier on the panel, a lot of it's getting very old, and it's up to the entrepreneurs and the operators in the group to fix that. I also want to point out the little bubbles around there are kind of locations where we have sites, offices, depots, etc. So we have a global presence, and as I said earlier, we've installed cables in every ocean in the world. So what is turnkey? In this industry, when we say turnkey, it means wet, dry, and marine. And there are only a couple other suppliers in the world who can boast of that. So looking closer at what we mean by wet plant, that would be the cable, of course, as well as the repeaters. Those are the optical amplifiers that boost the signal periodically as it propagates down the fiber. Branching units, which are used to split an optical cable into 2 cables or even 3 cables now. And that provides network flexibility, so you can reconfigure your network as it grows. And then there are other units, wavelength management units, gain equalizers, etc. The figure on the lower left there is our cable factory in Newington, New Hampshire. And you can see the cable ship docked there loading cable. That's where we build all of the cable repeaters. All of the wet plant pieces are built right there. And then they go out to sea just past Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and out to wherever in the world the cable's going to be installed. In terms of dry plant, I guess when you look at dry plant, it's becoming a smaller and smaller portion of the actual value of a cable. At one point, we used to look at dry plant as being roughly a third of the system cost. Well, today I would put that number more between 5 and 10% of a total system cost. And that, of course, is related to the general reduction in cost of electronics globally. These units are getting cheaper and cheaper to manufacture. But the important point here, by having the dry plant and the wet plant all designed and manufactured under one roof, you get that cohesiveness and that reassurance that the thing's going to work. Yes, it is possible to upgrade a system with another box, but from the outset, when you install that system, you want to be reassured that it is all going to function as planned. And I don't think you get that kind of reassurance unless you're working with a turnkey supplier. So when the people who design the dry plant are able to walk down the hall and talk to the people who design the wet plant, you really get the best overall system design. The marine tools. This is, as I alluded to earlier, one of the critical pieces of the supply. The ships, the tools, there in the center you see a cable plow. That's an ROV, or remotely operated vehicle, which is kind of an undersea robot that goes down and can bury the cable after it's been installed or do inspections. We have all of these tools in-house and all of this expertise. And there's quite a long process from initial study to getting a cable actually installed and commissioned, and we do all of that again in-house. And finally, we like to brag about our cable ships again. So there's another slide showing the 6 Reliance-class cable ships. They are all identical in design, and they were basically designed to be able to install a transatlantic cable in a single load. So you can fit roughly 5,000 kilometers of cable into one of these ships, and they'll go out and install from one into the other without a break. And then down below, we've got 2 other vessels, the Global Sentinel, which is based in Portland, Oregon, and our Spanish flagship, the Teneo, which is a smaller vessel, very flexible, that we use for a lot of shallow water or short haul work. So that was who we are. I'm going to talk a little bit about the emerging markets, and we touched on a lot of this during the panel conversation. But taking a closer look at the map around South America and Central America, I added it up, and it is about 100,000 kilometers of cable that has been installed and serving. That's just intra-America's cable that was installed, all of it between 1999 and 2001, pretty much. So you can see it's all getting to be a certain age, and it was designed for older technologies, the 2.5 gig and 10 gig transmission technologies. Those were direct detection technologies, which is different from the newer technologies we're rolling out now, which is coherent transmission. So because of that change in technology, there's a fundamental limitation as to how much you can upgrade one of these cables with additional capacity. So keeping that in mind, again, the infrastructure is aging and has limited usefulness. It was designed to operate for 25 years as a design life. The actual operating life of these systems is often much shorter, because at a certain point it's simply not economical to keep maintaining them relative to the value of the capacity that you're selling on that cable. So as I mentioned earlier, again, there have been a couple of systems announced, one in 2010 and one in 2012, represented by the little yellow and pink squares there. Those are the landing points of those new systems. They're not online yet. I don't have a status update on when they're coming. But the message that I wanted to get across with this slide is that there's a massive amount of footprint there that's not covered by that announced infrastructure. So if you go down the west coast or down the east coast of the continent, you can see there's a lot of opportunities there for new system builds. There's been talk, rumblings rumors about new systems being developed in these areas, but as far as I can tell, none of these things have really gotten off the ground in a very concrete way yet. And so for any entrepreneurs looking to develop a new system, I would point you to the West Coast, as well as the US-Brazil link. And then that could, of course, be carried down to Uruguay and Argentina as well. And then moving up from there, the Central American market is probably in more dire straits, actually, when you look at the infrastructure that's out there. There are only a couple of systems serving the Caribbean market. There are a lot of gaps that have been left by those new systems that were announced. So we're kind of waiting to see when new systems will come online, what it's going to take to actually pull together enough critical mass to get a new project rolling. You know, I've been doing this for a number of years, and I think that you really need leadership in a project like this. You need, typically that leadership has come from the United States, but maybe this is an opportunity for leaders from other parts of the world to step up and form new groups to take the initiative here. That's all I have, Erica. Is there any questions from the audience? Thank you.
Okay, we're approaching the end of the program, and we're very happy to donate 2 lucky draws this morning. Before we talk about the lucky draw, the area, the New York, New Jersey area, was hit by Hurricane Sandy last year, roughly at this time. And for those that live in this area, it was very difficult. Folks didn't have power. Some folks now aren't even in their homes. So APTelecom made a donation to Stronger Than the Storm, which is a nonprofit, a charity that's very near and dear to my heart. And Matt, just in case you were wondering, that's for New Jersey and New York, because remember, the Statue of Liberty is in New Jersey, my friend. No. But we did make that donation, and we're hopeful that the folks that were affected by the storm get back on their feet as soon as possible. Okay, so with that in mind, I'd like to ask Jeff Seal from Telecom Review North America to come up to the stage. Give Jeff a big round of applause. Okay.
Favorite part of any program, the lucky draw.
That's right.
Okay, we're going to draw for the first person on here. It's for some gift certificates, and my card is not in it. Mix it up a little bit, and John Pennywell from ATT. Come on down. Yeah, congratulations. Appreciate it. Okay, the second and the final lucky draw prize. We'll mix it up again. And Douglas Burnett. Come on down. Congratulations. Uh-huh. I'll let you take over.
Okay.
Okay.
That concludes the State of Subsea, and I think Jay-Z is going to take us out, so we'll look forward to seeing you in 2014. Thank you.
Down in Tribeca, right next to the narrow, but I'll be hood forever. I'm the new Sinatra, and since I made it here, I can make it anywhere. Yeah, they love me everywhere. I used to cop in Harlem, all of my Dominicanos right